Team Hochberg Traffic Center, Jim Telemonte.
Traffic is a little bit lighter than usual this morning. We look at the inbound Edens first and see about a 2-minute delay. Foster to the junction, outbound still clear. Inbound Kennedy, traffic slow. Harlem to Lawrence and Chicago Avenue to Ohio. 25 minutes, O'Hare to downtown, outbound 22. Inbound Eisenhower, traffic's tight from before First Avenue to Des Plaines Avenue and Demon to around Racine. 34 minutes, 390 to downtown, outbound 29. Inbound Stevenson, 40 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive, outbound delay free. Inbound Ryan, heavy 83rd to 71st. That's Cermak to the Burns Circle. 22 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57, 17 minutes, I-80 to the Burns, Bishop Fort 19. Tollway traffic still very light. That's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Cloudy. There may be a couple of late afternoon showers, and we will warm up to 62. And then cool down overnight, low 35. Sunny tomorrow, breezy, high 50. 37 at O'Hare. Watch out for that fog. Next news at 7. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live from Global Water Technology in South Holland, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour. And we'll be talking to the folks here about their business, and actually dovetails quite nicely with our discussion of coronavirus and the prevention of the spread of pathogens, whether airborne or, in the case of their business, waterborne. Turning to coronavirus and China specifically, since there's been so much in the way of histrionics in response to naming coronavirus. In other words, naming it the Wuhan virus.
Or the China
virus. That is xenophobic, and no less an authority than Jim Acosta said so after the president's speech last night.
The president referred to the coronavirus as a, quote, foreign virus. That I think was interesting because as I was talking to sources earlier this evening, one of the points that the president wanted to make tonight, wanted to get across to Americans, is that this virus did not start here, but that they're dealing with it. Now, why the president would go as far as to describe it as a foreign virus, that is something we'll also be asking questions about. But it should be pointed out that Stephen Miller, who is an immigration hardliner who advises the president, is one of his top domestic policy advisors and speechwriters, right. Was a driving force in writing the speech. And I think it's going to it's going to come across to a lot of Americans as smacking of xenophobia, to use that kind of term in this speech.
No,
well, look, sometimes we can answer the questions, and the answer.
Very high level discussion between Fredo and Acosta there. Also, this just on topic. President Xi Jinping, he's the president of China.
Yes, he was recently in Wuhan. And by the way, kids are back to school and factories are opening up there.
Yeah,
something that gets lost in the mainstream media.
We'll get to separating fact from Chinese communist propaganda in a moment. But on February 3rd, in a speech before the Politburo, President Xi, quote, after the outbreak of the new coronavirus pneumonia in Wuhan on January 7th, when I presided over a meeting of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee, I made a request for the prevention and the control of the new coronavirus phenomena. He cited outbreak of the new coronavirus pneumonia in Wuhan. Somebody needs to tell President Xi that he's a racist. And if he doesn't continue patroning, as AOC terms it, if he doesn't continue patroning Chinese restaurants, then he's really a racist.
Honestly, it sounds almost so silly to say, but there's a lot of restaurants that are feeling the pain of racism, where people are literally not patroning Chinese restaurants. They're not patroning Asian restaurants because of just straight up racism around the coronavirus. So
I can't wait till AOC gets a chance to take President Xi to task. That's going to be a real clash of the titans. For more on this topic, to separate the idiocy of some of our politicians and the propaganda of the Chinese communists from fact, we're pleased to be joined by Gordon Chang. He's a columnist at the Daily Beast. He's also the author of Losing South Korea and the Coming Collapse of China. And you can follow him at Gordon C. Chang on Twitter, which I also just tweeted out. Mr. Chang, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dan and Amy.
So what about President Xi's visit to Wuhan and the declaration that they're on the other side of the outbreak and that things are starting to get back to normal in China?
Well, it's possible, but we really don't know. And the reason is that Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the Communist Party, President of the Chinese state, has really imposed extraordinary information controls. So his controls support his idea that China should get back to their job sites, and so therefore it is issuing statistics on new infections and deaths which support that narrative. Those statistics could be true, but we know in the past they haven't been, and whenever Chinese statistics support Communist Party policy, you have to be suspicious.
Well, what about there are American companies that reopened? I knew those 12 Starbucks that were closed, they reopened 2 weeks ago. So that's good news, and I trust that because they're American companies and American-owned. Do you buy that even?
Well, it's part of, I think, Xi Jinping's order to get back to work. Now, I think my guess, and it's only a guess, is that in certain parts of China, for instance, Wuhan, the virus may have subsided because it's ravaged so many people. But there are indications that there are new hotspots in China, including possibly Beijing, where the virus is spreading. So we're not going to learn about that until much later because of those attempts to control the narrative by Xi Jinping.
Well, and I know we've got Democrat politicians here very worried about the word choices of President Trump, not so worried about the communist propaganda emanating from China, where China has tried to flip the script and say that coronavirus was something that finds its genesis in America.
That's really critical point that people are not making, and I'm glad that you did. For more than a month, Communist Party propaganda and foreign ministry propaganda has been that this virus is spread by the United States. We've caused panic. We are immoral, racist, and that the origin is the U.S., and they've allowed that narrative, especially on social media, to predominate. What Secretary of State Pompeo, Vice President Pence, and now the President have done is to make a point that this is not from the United States. So this is, people in the U.S. should understand that we're under attack from China. China's laying the groundwork for a lashing out. This could be not only just irresponsible, but it could also be dangerous. And so I hope that Jim Acosta would understand that.
Wow. Oh, boy. It's a short conversation that thinks Jim Acosta is interested in understanding, including this story. We know about the persecution of Uyghur Muslim minorities in China at the hands of the Chinese communists. And we've heard stories before about organ harvesting of these Muslim prisoners. And there's a story out again suggesting that may be going on, harvesting organs from these prisoners to save Chinese nationals. Human Rights Monitors, this is a report out from a British tabloid, Human Rights Monitors asking how 2 matching lungs needed for a 59-year-old's life-saving surgery were found in a few days, whereas in America, for example, you need a lung transplant, you could be waiting for months or years. And so what about that, about those sort of, just ghastly human rights abuses in China?
Well, it's been established by a tribunal in London that China has been, in general, organ harvesting. And, in particular cases that have cropped up in the coronavirus episode, we don't have confirmation of that, but nonetheless, it is highly probable that those charges are correct because Beijing has, over the course of decades, been forcibly taking organs from various people, including prisoners, Falun Gong practitioners, and others. This is ghastly, and now the world is starting to pay attention because of the incidents that you mentioned. And clearly the United States and the rest of the international community has to demand that China stop it and impose costs on China for not stopping it.
And when we think about China and how precarious the Xi regime is, What's your handle on that? The combination of the Hong Kong democracy protesters, which are still organizing, the virus has muted that, but they're still present and active, as I understand it from what I've read, but you can inform that statement, as well as how the populace is receiving the government's response to this virus.
I tend to think that Xi Jinping's position must be fragile or at least weakening. It's very hard to tell, but he's been responsible for various policy mistakes, including Hong Kong, where, by the way, this coronavirus episode has weakened support for China for various reasons. Although, of course, as you point out, the protests have diminished in size because people are afraid to come out. It's very difficult to tell, but clearly Xi Jinping has been responsible for mistakes. People have criticized him for it. And during the coronavirus outbreak, many Chinese are white-hot angry, and they're demanding fundamental political change. You add all that together, including a weakening economy, which at the moment is contracting, and you say the guy's got to be in trouble. But you got to remember that this is a totalitarian political system we're talking about, and there's a lot that we do not know. Even people who follow it all the time, there's just a lot that we do not know.
And even if Xi became too much of a liability for the Communist Party, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see some sort of overthrow and move to a more democratic society. Isn't it more likely you just see one communist switched in for another?
Yes, that's probable. It's really fascinating to think about what's going on in Beijing right now. But at this point where I think senior Communist Party leaders know that they're in trouble in general, they're not going to get rid of Xi Jinping, at least overtly. And the reason is that would endanger the system and endanger themselves. So it's sort of like they believe that they're all going to hang together, so they are sticking together, at least at the present moment.
Has President Trump's relationship with Xi Jinping bewildered you at all? Or because President Trump is very complimentary of him. I remember at the beginning of this, he's like, oh, the president of China has this under control and everything's fine, nothing to see here.
Yeah, I don't like the language of our president in dealing with the Chinese because it is overly generous. It could very well be that President Trump is just following what has been a 4-decade foreign policy consensus of you got to be nice to the Chinese. That consensus, though, I think has proven to be wrong. And I think that you could very well find a different attitude towards China, especially as Beijing pushes us in really very dangerous directions. And also, if the president were to be reelected, his second-term China policies could be very different from first-term ones. And I think you could probably also say that about North Korea. But at the present time, I don't like it when our president says things which are overly generous to the most dangerous figure in the world, and that is Xi Jinping.
When we're trying to assess the danger of the coronavirus, the lethality rates, the most vulnerable populations, we're relying a lot on whatever we think the true data is coming out of China, because that's where the greatest number of cases are found to this point, right? And so there was a briefing on Capitol Hill yesterday where those in attendance were told, among other things, that half the patients of the more than 3,000 who died of coronavirus in China had high blood pressure, immune suppressed or on drugs that immune suppress, such as chemo, or suffering from lung disease such as emphysema, cystic fibrosis, etc. To suggest, the underlying condition is what really makes, and age is what really makes coronavirus lethal. And if you're younger and you don't have that underlying condition, then it's unlikely to be lethal. I mean, it's like flu unlikely to be lethal. Of course, the whole thing is unlikely in terms of percentages. But should we take that? I mean, how do we really know that's the case with those who died or were infected with the virus in China?
We don't, because China's statistics, especially in the beginning stages of this, were completely unreliable. 2 reasons. First of all, there was the one that always is true, which is falsification. That's always present. But also, I think that health authorities in Wuhan, the epicenter, were just overwhelmed, and keeping accurate statistics was not at the top of their priority list, especially when people were dropping dead in the streets and people were corpses littered on hospital floors. But the point is, we don't know the lethality of this because we don't know the deaths. China's been hiding those. And they were also hiding infections. And for the reason you mentioned, a lot of people just don't report. So this could be, as lethal as the World Health Organization said, which is 3.4%, which would be off the charts high. But it's probably more likely at the 1% level, which Dr. Anthony Fauci of NIH said. That makes it 10 times more lethal than seasonal flu, which is 0.1%. But we do know that this is a dangerous bug because it's highly transmissible, and that makes this a very serious situation.
He is Gordon Chang. He's a columnist at the Daily Beast. He's the author of Losing South Korea, as well as The Coming Collapse of China. And again, follow him at Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon Chang, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan and Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs, the president to delay the April 15th tax deadline. Federal budget deficit balloons by 15%, and the Sprint T-Mobile merger okayed by the state of California. Those stories next.
In a recent survey, investors shared what they felt were the greatest threats to their retirement. It's no surprise the most common threats include stock market volatility, economic uncertainty, conflict in the Middle East, the 2020 presidential impeachment, and election. Unfortunately, there are many threats beyond your control that can affect your retirement savings. At Goldco, a leader in precious metals, the team believes one way to protect your investment portfolio is with physical gold and silver. Goldco has helped thousands of investors safeguard their retirement, especially in times of uncertainty. In fact, if you call 855-971-2006, Goldco will send you a free 1-ounce silver American Eagle coin. And all you have to do is pay for shipping and handling. No obligation. 100% free. Call 855-971-2006 to get your free silver American Eagle coin. That's